Dumela, Sawubona, Sakpase, Namaste, Otshi, Jupiter Ultra, Assalamu alaikum, Hotep. Buenas noches, bonsoir. What's going on, folks? Tonight is a very, very special season 2, episode 43 of the Doria Larry Show. Tonight is so different because I am actually reviewing a movie. Now, spoiler alert, if you did not see Wakanda Forever, I need for you to hop off of this right now. I'm giving you the opportunity. This is total spoiler, but it's really like a day of like question and answer because yes, I did go see the initial movie and then I went to see the Wakanda Forever last night, but I left going like, I think I'm missing something. I really think I'm missing something. So I decided to invite one of Marvel's like just kings of comics, kings of the storyline, brother Frank Crenshaw. Now, some of you know that this is an amazing human being, but he's joined me on my show tonight in order to answer some questions. So I really hope that you would sort of give us a little opportunity to have like a little banter, a little Q&A, and help me demystify some of this stuff. So here we go.
Hey there. Good evening. How are you?
Hey, I'm so thrilled. Now, those of
Thanks
you
for having me.
who are good, those of you who are actually listening, we're praying that there is not this little delay. If you hear a delay, when you're watching live, just sort of send me a comment and let me know because I'm not really sure what's showing up. So let's get right into it. Thank you very much, Frank Crenshaw.
Thanks for having me again.
I'm very excited. And all Monday. Right now, this is what I call Mad Quest Monday. You do not know what is. You have not lived. There we go. That's my disclaimer. So I went to see the original Black Panther 2 years ago when it first came out. I was part of the initial fighting stuff, and we were all exciting. And I went. Now, mind you, I am not a comic aficionado. I had to learn as we were going along, and watch and all of this stuff, the different characters, these relationships, duality, and black politics, Afrofuturism that was clearly evident in the entire movie, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. Now, some people actually, of course, did a lot of spin-off and watched other iterations of it. But it sounds like, and it felt like Marvel lifted out of the pages this character and this city and lifestyle and theology, if you will, and I will say theology, and put it onto the screen. And of course, for people in particular, not states, but across the world, took it to home, and everybody saluted it. It feels like it sort of went back onto the page because it came back onto the screen with even more beautiful vengeance. Of course, we will have a moment of silence for Brother Chadwick. And now his image is back on the screen. This is where I have it.
Okay.
First of all, help me with the origin of Black Panther, which you read on the page back in the day.
All right. Well, the first thing that you have to know about T'Challa, the Black Panther, is that he was the first Black superhero. Fantastic Four issue 76 in 1965 was his first appearance.
Now wait. Did you have that copy? Did you read it?
Who are you talking to? You know I have the copy. It is one of those iconic issues. In Fantastic Four, you had the onset of some great characters: Silver Surfer, Galactus, some of the early appearances of Namor. As a matter of fact, that was one of their earliest foes when the Fantastic Four comic book came out in 64, 65. So.
So I want at some point for you to get that copy and like hold it up and be like,
well,
here
it is in the archives, Presbyterians. It's valuable, so it's not easily accessible.
It's in the ball.
Yes, very much so.
Some bank.
But in any event, Stan Lee decided that it was time to have a major African character, not necessarily African American character. He also created the first African American superhero in the Falcon, which you'll talk about in another podcast at some point in time. Sam Wilson was the first African American superhero that Marvel created, and that was in one of the Captain America books in 1968. So Marvel was responsible for bringing Black people to the front for the first time in comic books. DC Comics, which is Marvel's competitor, didn't have anybody until they had Black Lightning thereafter.
Now I'm familiar with Black Lightning,
right?
But I actually was not familiar with Black Panther, so I'm excited. Okay.
Right, much like his movie Incarnation, he is king of an African city, the most technologically advanced city on the planet that nobody knew about. And the reason that they didn't know about is because their technology allowed them to shield themselves from any outsiders. And that's always depicted when you see ships coming into Wakanda. They always pass through this barrier that looks like the forest. Well, that was something that was created way back in 1965. And T'Challa single-handedly bested the Fantastic Four in single combat. He'd be even the Thing, who is the powerhouse of the Fantastic Four, he was able to beat him. I know, mind blown. I got you.
The nature of all of it is so incredible. It's so incredible. So question. In the first movie, did I miss something, or was there no iteration of Namor?
Right, that is correct. Namor was not mentioned in the first movie because I'm not saying that you would know, but if you're following the MCU, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they started in 2008. And by the time you get 10 years later in 2018, when Black Panther is coming on, he had already appeared in Captain America Winter Soldier.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Captain America Civil War. That's the first time you see T'Challa. Now, us comic book geeks, we're stoked because, hey, we got our guy here finally. And it was in that movie that T'Challa became king by the assassination of his father. So when you get to 2018, all that had transpired. The world now knows that Wakanda exists, but they still don't know where it is. They still believe that there's just primitive farmers and tradesmen. They don't know anything about the technological advances that Wakanda has in store.
Okay. So now that we got that part. And those of you who are popping on, please let me know if you hear any echo. If so, I need to do something different. But thank you very much to those people who are popping on. And please share this out again. This is spoiler alert. Do not say if you did not watch the movie and you're planning on watching it. Okay. So now, we talked about comic book geeks, and I don't want to call them. Let's call them fans.
No, fans are less than geeks. Fans are people who subscribe to comic books, but they don't understand the underlying values. The geek is not necessarily a misnomer, nor is it a derogatory term. We who are geeks, we know our stuff.
Clearly, that's why I had to at least have you on. There's two other people that I would love to add to this conversation.
I'm sure.
On another platform. So I may hop on and just like keep my popcorn. I know I can tell it. That's why you're here.
Exactly.
Okay. So those who are popping on again, we're doing Wakanda Forever, part 2 of the Black Panther series. So here's where it gets most confusing to me.
Mm-hmm.
From a historical perspective, why are we fighting with this on now? Now, before you answer, this is my perspective. two cultural groups
Two
that
cultural groups that globally
were
were
colonized.
colonized,
Clean.
clean,
Were colonized.
were colonized.
One would think
One would think that
there would not
there
be
would not be a
competition, an animosity,
animosity,
that there would be
partnership.
Why is it
Why is it that they
start with,
hey,
we're
we're
secret. We entered into your space, and we need for you to, so do this with us against the them, so that we can stay. First of all, how did the oh geez, vibranium get to Mesoamerica? Wakanda folks that is just had to happen.
Well, you first have to understand that didn't take place in Mesoamerica. Wakanda and Talokan are not that far apart. So we only know the Wakandan side of the story in Black Panther. We know that the vibranium meteor came, crash landed, and then the Wakandan culture used it to advance. But it was not obviously was not the only bit of vibranium that landed on Earth, because when the Mesoamerican people got exposed to their version of vibranium, you realize that although it's similar, it's not the same. In comic book culture, there are 3 types of vibranium. Like they don't go into those details in the movies. So the fact that the Wakandans didn't even know that another point on Earth had vibranium was the key. So they have no knowledge of these people. It wasn't until the Americans, if you remember, if anybody's watching now, this is where the spoilers begin. It wasn't until the Americans began surveying for vibranium. But remember, they only know about Wakandan vibranium, but they can't go to Wakanda to get it. So Shuri, being the scientist, has always protected Wakanda from the outside. When T'Challa opened up the Wakandan borders, we were supposed to share intel, technology, etc. But the government of the United States actually wanted to create weapons with vibranium. So instead of trying to get into Wakanda, they stumbled across Riri Williams' science project. She was able to find vibranium. So now the Americans felt like, well, if you're not going to share yours, we'll go find some others. And her device wasn't intended to do that. It was a byproduct of what it was doing. So they realized, hey, we can find vibranium. We don't need theirs. And that's when they invaded the waters of Talokan. So these two cultures do not connect in the storyline, even though you view them as two colonized people. But it's much like the Africans who were brought over as slaves and the Native Americans who were enslaved when the Europeans came here. They had no knowledge of each other until that common factor, which was the colonizers, brought them together. So Namor has a different viewpoint of the outside world. And to just give you a brief background around Namor, Namor is Marvel Comics' second venue into comic book history with the superheroes. He's also the first mutant that was ever written, because even though he is a pink-skinned Atlantean in the comics, because Aquaman was released a couple of years ago, Marvel didn't want to have a competing underwater superhero, so they changed Atlantis to Talokan, and they used Meso culture as the basis for Talokan, and that's where the comic book derivative takes off.
Okay. So I do understand that there is a bit of an echo that is heard.
I'm going to skip that.
and you're going to
and
speak
you're
more.
going to speak more.
Okay.
So help me
Help me
understand
understand
the origin
the origin
of
of
his
his
mutism,
mutism,
and because it
and
almost feels like
because it
this
almost
is
feels like this is
the connection to
the
like
connection to like
Superman
Superman
and the
and the
meteor,
meteor, and it
only
only
mutating him,
mutating
but
him,
it doesn't
but it
mutate
doesn't
anyone else.
mutate anyone else.
Well, no, Superman. Well, first, Superman's not a mutant. He's an alien. So we can take him off the table entirely. He's not from this planet. Whereas the Wakandans used vibranium for medicine, cultural aspects, scientific technology. The same thing was going on in Talokan, but in the guise of, culture that the Mayans inspired. So if you looked at the way Talokans greet each other, it's the open whale mouth, right? Which is the same thing as this. They're two separate cultures. Both have vibranium to infuse their culture, but they're used differently. Whereas Namor views Wakandan as kin because they're a monarchy, just like the Talokans. They have a king. Wakanda has a king. So in his mind, he thinks that Wakanda and Talokan should fight against the surface world. But by T'Challa going against all the previous Black Panthers who had kept Wakandan secret from the outside world, their viewpoints are different. Now, unfortunately, because of the passing of Chadwick Boseman, we don't have T'Challa in this movie. So now Shuri steps in and becomes the lead character. And if you remember Shuri from the first movie, in the first movie, she's really a teenager. Okay. And her thing is science versus religion. Wakanda has a tribal system and a monarchy at the same time, which is the inner conflict that you saw between M'Baku and the mountain people and Jabari and the plains people, because even though they subscribe to T'Challa's rule, they still have their own areas that they rule in a different way. So much like ancient Africa, the tribes have their own tradition. They follow their own spiritual gods and goddesses, but they subscribe to the rule of T'Challa. Once T'Challa is no longer in the picture, now you have all these tribes say, well, what do we do? That's why you have a council. Remember, they always meet in the Queen's throne room. They say, well, this is what's going on in my sector. This is going on in my sector. And there's a collective. Killmonger in the first movie changed that because he introduced the fact that we should be the lead, not necessarily away from everybody. Once that happens, Wakandan culture changes. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay.
So I'm trying to type so people won't hear the echo.
Say it anyway, because this screen is very small.
Not a problem. So can you explain the 6-year time difference? I was totally confused about that.
All right. Being that you didn't follow the entire arc of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Avengers had a 3-movie arc when they were fighting Thanos. At the end of Avengers Infinity War, Thanos had acquired the Infinity Gems and snapped half of existence out. For 5 years, half the people were no longer alive. At the end of Avengers Endgame, they were brought back. So there was a 5-year time gap. From the time that Avengers Endgame ended, there have been additional years that takes you up to this, because you had 2 movies in between. So you're talking about it's been 5 years that they were missing, and at least 3 years that since they came back, because in that time T'Challa had fallen ill and he had passed on. So it's 7 or 8 years from the last Avengers movie to this movie.
Wait, so that means that they incorporated the time gap with Thanos into Black Panther and
into every movie, not just Black Panther.
So that means I gotta go watch all of them in order for it to make sense.
Kind of, sort of, or you can have a long chat with me.
Well, I would always love to have a long chat with you. That's not a problem.
But that's where the time jump comes. Bring my popcorn. That's where the time jump comes from. I don't know if you saw the last Doctor Strange or the last Spider-Man movie. Remember, Peter Parker was in that last movie, and he was gone for 5 years. So when the blip was undone by Tony Stark, they hadn't really aged, but they had missed 5 years. So when they came back, the world was very different. Same thing for T'Challa. He was one of those people who disappeared in the snap. And then when he comes back 5 years later, he now has to reimagine himself as a ruler, now not trying to be hidden, because that was the last thing that he did.
Okay. So that explains. Now again, people, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm about to say something. That will be a little giveaway. Let's just say that explains what is shown after the credit.
Exactly. And why
those people who left at that time in the credits, I'm like,
well, they just don't know any better. Right.
Those people who stayed for the credit got the bonus.
Right.
But that explained that because I wasn't sure how Lupita Nyong'o's character. Like, I've been in Haiti, and I was here for 5 years. And when he passed away, it was too much for me.
Right, but remember, she's not just there for 5 years, because there was 5 years before she went there. Remember, they didn't have what they had until he had gotten back, and 5 years had already passed at that point. So you now have another 5 years to 6 years between that time T'Challa returns. He and Lupita Nyong'o have what they have, and they do what they do in the way that they do it. And it's hard to talk around it because I'm not trying to spoil it, but I told people. If you didn't see the movie, you want to see the movie. Do not come. Well, that explains the age of the child.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So that also explains the point. Because I was fascinated how the first movie ends with, of course, her fabulous hair.
Right.
And while she's kind of aged almost diva, especially when she's in the court. It tells them.
Absolutely.
French ambassador. What you talking about? These are your people. What they doing?
Consider this a gift.
You can't trust.
See, next time we won't be so generous.
We'll see. Okay. So here's the thing I didn't know. How does Shuri recreate the flower? Is there some connection to the bracelet because there's this whole there was connection.
Well, I know you're probably gasping and wowing and cooing when it was going on, but remember, the heart-shaped herb was a product of the meteorite enriching the soil in Wakanda. Well, it stands to reason that when Namor gives her the bracelet, which was given to him by his mother, which contained the same kind of signature that vibranium gives off altogether, Shuri, being a scientist, figured that now, remember, she was trying to recreate that to save T'Challa's life before he passed. Remember, she talked about that. I was trying to save my brother's life. And there was something in the sequence that was missing. The thing that was missing was the vibranium. So when she goes back with the bracelet, she can now, remember, she runs the test, and the test says 98% effective. So now she's able to recreate the heart-shaped herb that now she takes and becomes the new Black Panther. because the same energy that is in Wakandan vibranium is also in Talocan vibranium, which means the only difference is where it landed. The Talocans became an aquatic people because the vibranium landed in the water.
Wait, but then where did the vibranium land in Wakanda?
It's on. If you ever see in the background, there's this huge mountain. Like when you see the overhead scenes, that's a vibranium mountain.
So when they showed that image of Talocan, and they go deep down,
and they go deep down,
and he says, "Oh, I brought like a bit of the sun." She says, looking at their space, this is like vibranium is all over the place.
Right, because remember when they fought on the bridge, she said they told the Dora Milaje to stop them, and the queen didn't understand. She said he is covered in vibranium.
Yes.
Remember that line?
I do remember that. So here's the last question that I have. His mutant physique, let's say, allows him to be like a reptile. He can live on.
No, not a reptile.
He can exist for a time on land.
Right.
And he thrives in water.
Right, but that's not his mutation. That's not his only mutation.
No. So that's
one of the things.
The ears,
the wings, feet.
That's the big mutation.
But everybody else has to wear that like mask.
Well, remember, his father is human. All the other Talocan people are mating with one another. So when they go in the water, they turn blue and they're able to breathe water. Remember, that was in the beginning of the movie, where when his mother went into the water, she was already pregnant with him. Remember, and his father was killed in that raid and fire that he did. But that's why he doesn't need any apparatus to breathe underwater or in the air, because his physiology is part human and part, I want to say Atlantean, but Talocan.
Aquatic.
Well, it's not just aquatic, because then you would think he's part fish too. So, and he's not.
But they talk about how the other Talocans have gills.
Right, but he doesn't need them. He has lungs.
Which is why Shuri said he's almost like a jellyfish because he can absorb the oxygen through the water.
Right. And the other part is, in the water, he's much more powerful than he is in the air. Like if you fight him in the water, he's 10 times as strong as he is on dry land, even though he's immensely strong on dry land, which is why they tried to dry him out, the moisture content. And it takes a lot because his skin is very dense. Like you're not really going to stab him with any puncture wounds. Bullets will bounce off him the whole night because his skin is that dense. However, in the water, he becomes even more powerful because that's his native element.
So here's the last question I want to engage in today. We will be back. What was very interesting is when they brought the Catholic Church and the element where he goes to give his mother his last wishes. She says, "Bury me in the land that I'm from."
Of my birth,
right? Of my birth. They come out of the water, and he's like,
"It's a clear what the hell is going on here." A moment,
right? Like what the? And their first image was that these basically his mother's people, chained, shackled, and being dragged and being like whipped. And interestingly enough, although I've studied a little bit of story, that's the first time that I've seen let's say our
brown brothers and sisters
in the
very similar
position that we are so bombarded with in
the story from a certain perspective. The first time I've seen it like that.
So that sort of
hit me.
Was that evident in the comics?
Yeah, but not to that degree, because you're talking about a character that was, originated in 1944, 45. And remember that, the comic books at that time were written by white people from a white person's perspective. Cultural differences were minimized only because they wanted to remain in that we are the superior race type thing. If you look at Submariner, Namor, that's his other name, his father being Captain Mackenzie, meets up with the Queen of Atlantis, during they're battling on the ocean, and somehow they are able to communicate. And the captain wants to stop fighting, so they fall in love, but his crew mutinies and kills him. Then the Queen of Atlantis is rescued by the Atlanteans and brought back to Atlantis. She gives birth to Namor, realizing that instead of having blue skin, he has pink skin because his father was human.
Okay, where can I get? I can't get the
copy of this in print. Where can I get this story?
I will send you a YouTube link to the history of Namor, the history of Wakanda, and there's an ongoing history between the Black Panther and Namor. The other thing you must also consider is that Namor is infinitely older than T'Challa. In the comic books, Namor has been fighting a Black Panther since T'Challa's great grandfather. So,
but it sounds like Namor is 500 years older because
right.
Let's say there was something about like you've been alive since I think Shuri says like 1400 or 1500 when in essence the Spaniards came to what we now know as Mesoamerica, or Mexico, the Yucatan.
Exactly.
And that was about the 1500s.
So he's that old.
Black Panther is only four generations.
Oh, no.
Would that make sense?
No. The Black Panther,
great grandfather.
Right, but he's been fighting them since then. There have been Black Panthers from with the BC era. You have to remember when the original vibranium meteorite hit Africa, that was way back when man was in his infancy. So there have been Black Panthers passed down. Like I told you earlier, each tribe has a different god or goddess. So the Panther tribe prays to Bas, which is the Panther god. M'Baku's tribe prays to the gorilla god. You understand? Jabari's tribe plays to the rhino god. So these all are African deities that control what goes on in each tribe. So the original Black Panther, who was the first person to meet Bas on the ancestral plane, was imbued with the knowledge to get the herb and begin the journey of Black Panther. Black Panther is not a family title. It's an inherited title. You have to battle for that title. But you don't necessarily have to be in one specific tribe or another. As long as you can beat the current Black Panther, you now can become the Black Panther. Just like if you remember in the first Black Panther movie when T'Challa's father ended up killing his brother. Remember, his brother sent him there as a sleeper agent to see what the rest of the world was doing because he was trying to protect Wakandan interests. And that's where the conflict with Killmonger comes in. You understand his reasoning, even if you don't agree with his method. And that's the parallel to Namor. You understand his reasoning because when he and Shuri have that conversation, I need to know whether or not Wakanda is an ally or an enemy. We share a common goal. And if you think about it, Namor's arc and T'Challa's arc are very similar. They both lose their fathers. They're both raised by their mothers. They both are kings in search of the right path. Namor is more violent, whereas T'Challa is the first Black Panther to use reason to bark the system. Because remember when he went to the ancestral plane and he told his father, he said, "You're wrong. You have told me, you have all lied to me." And he embarked on a different arc than any other Black Panther before him.
So this is definitely
not just one for the book,
but it's one for
a rewatch,
a one for a
YouTube study,
and then a further conversation. Those of you who have been watching,
I am so thankful that you blessed our presence tonight. My first movie review with
Man of a Certain Age,
Brother Frank Crenshaw.
We will be back. Our audio will be better. I'm going to sign off. If you have any comments or questions, please drop them in the little chat below. There's another movie or show that you would like me to review. I'm happy to add that onto my new season.
And we'll be ready for part 2.
We'll be ready for
part 2.
That's right. Because
the next Black Panther. We're gonna have to wait a couple years, but there probably will be one.
Oh, without. If you saw at the end of the credits, it always says the Black Panther will return.
Will return.
Stronger,
and probably wiser.
Good night,
everyone.
Take care. Thanks for having me again.